I've spent years trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, but I know the truth. It really happened, all of it. And no matter how I tell this story, you probably won't believe me. Honestly, I don't blame you. If I hadn't lived it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. It started on my 8th birthday. We didn't have much money growing up, so presents were usually modest, a small toy, a colouring book, maybe a pack of trading cards if I was lucky. But that year, my Aunt Carol visited from out of town. Aunt Carol was the kind of relative who always showed up with something loud and over the top, whether it was a tacky sweater for Christmas or a bright green wig she once gave me just for fun. This time it was a stuffed ALF doll. I didn't even watch the show. Sure, I'd seen a few episodes when my mum wasn't hogging the TV for her soap operas, but ALF wasn't exactly my favourite. Still, I remember smiling and thanking her like a good kid should. It was a big plush toy about 2 feet tall, with those goofy cartoon eyes and a weird snout that was supposed to be endearing but always looked a little off. Aunt Carol grinned like she'd given me the world. "You love it, don't you? Found it at a garage sale, practically new." I hugged it to my chest and nodded, though the fabric felt stiff, like it had been left out in the rain and dried in the sun. It smelled faintly of mildew too, but I didn't say anything. That would have hurt her feelings. Later that night, after the cake and ice cream and the usual small talk about how much I'd grown, Aunt Carol went home, leaving me with my new stuffed companion. I didn't think much of it at first. I set ALF on the shelf next to my other toys and went about the rest of my evening. That night, though, something changed. I woke up sometime after midnight to the feeling of eyes on me. My room was dark except for a thin sliver of moonlight sneaking through the curtains, but I could still make out the shapes of my toys on the shelf. All of them were still, all except one. ALF wasn't where I'd left him. He was on the floor now, sitting upright with his arms spread wide, as though he'd just been dropped and was waiting for someone to pick him up. I stared at him for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself I must have knocked him over by accident. But deep down, I knew better. His face was turned toward me. I didn't scream, I didn't even move. I just pulled the covers up over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. I stayed that way until morning, heart racing, every little creak in the house making me flinch. When I finally worked up the courage to look, ALF was back on the shelf, sitting exactly where I'd placed him the night before. I told myself it had to be a dream, or maybe my mum had picked him up and put him back without saying anything. That made sense, didn't it? But something about the way he sat there, so perfectly posed, sent a shiver crawling up my spine. It was just the beginning. After that first night, I tried to forget about ALF. I really did. It was just a doll, after all, a stuffed toy from a TV show. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking, or maybe Mom had moved it and didn't think to mention it. Logical explanations, that's what I clung to. But ALF wasn't done with me. A few days later, I was sitting in my room playing with my action figures when I heard it for the first time. A whisper. It was faint, almost too soft to catch, like the breeze through a cracked window. At first, I thought it was my mum, maybe talking on the phone in the living room, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from my shelf. I froze, my hand gripping one of the action figures so tightly I could feel the plastic bending under my fingers. Slowly I turned toward the shelf. ALF sat there, staring forward with that goofy grin on his face, the same as always. But the whisper didn't stop. "Hey, kid!" I gasped and shot to my feet, knocking over a stack of comic books in the process. The whisper was clear now, soft, raspy, and somehow playful, like a bad impression of a cartoon villain. "Hey, kid, come closer." I backed away instead, my legs bumping into the bed. The voice was definitely coming from ALF. I could feel it in my chest, like the words weren't just sounds, but something deeper, vibrating in my bones. "Why don't we play a game?" the voice continued. "You like games, don't you?" I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight, like invisible hands were wrapped around it. The whisper turned into a chuckle, a low, guttural sound that didn't belong in the mouth of a stuffed animal. "Let's play hide and seek. You hide and I'll find you." That was enough. I bolted from the room, nearly tripping over the comic books scattered on the floor. I didn't stop running until I was in the kitchen where my mum was washing dishes. "Mum!" I cried, grabbing her arm. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, turning to look at me with concern. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? That my stuffed ALF doll was talking to me? That it wanted to play hide and seek? She'd never believe me. I don't feel good," I mumbled instead. She frowned, pressing a hand to my forehead. "You don't feel warm. Maybe you're just tired. Why don't you lie down for a bit?" I nodded, even though the last thing I wanted to do was go back to my room. I spent the rest of the afternoon curled up on the couch, watching cartoons and trying not to think about the voice. That night, though, things got worse. I woke up again in the middle of the night, this time to the sound of laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. The same raspy, mocking tone as the whisper. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. ALF wasn't on the shelf. He was on the floor again, closer this time, sitting just a few feet away from my bed. His head was tilted slightly to the side, as though he were studying me. "You didn't want to play before," the voice said, though ALF's mouth didn't move. "But you'll play now, won't you?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "Don't be scared," the voice cooed. "I just want to be your friend. Don't you want to be my friend?" "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The laughter returned, louder now, filling the room like a horrible echo. "Oh, but you will. You'll see. We're going to have so much fun." I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the doll and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft thud and landed in a crumpled heap on the floor. The room fell silent. I waited, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, I crawled out of bed and opened the door, leaving the room as quickly and quietly as I could. That night, I slept on the couch. I didn't go back to my room until morning, and when I did, ALF was back on the shelf, sitting exactly where he always had. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. How could I? My mum would have thought I was making it up, and my dad wasn't in the picture to begin with. I was alone in this. For the next few days, I tried to avoid my room as much as possible. I spent most of my time in the living room or outside, riding my bike up and down the block until the streetlights flickered on. But no matter how far I went or how long I stayed out, I couldn't escape the feeling that ALF was waiting for me. And he was. The whispers started again that weekend. Only this time they weren't asking to play, they were making demands. "Bring me something sharp," the voice hissed one night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and pretending I didn't hear it. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the blankets up to my chin. "Did you hear me, kid? A knife, a pair of scissors, something sharp. Don't make me ask again." My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. I wanted to scream, to run to my mum and beg her to get rid of the doll, but fear rooted me in place. What if ALF got mad? What if he hurt her? "Do it," the voice growled, the sound cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Do it now or I'll come get you." Tears streamed down my face as I slid out of bed and crept toward the kitchen. The house was silent except for the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I opened the drawer where Mum kept the scissors and took out the smallest pair, the kind with the rounded tips meant for kids. I didn't want to go back to my room, but I didn't have a choice. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I shuffled down the hall, clutching the scissors so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I opened the door, ALF was sitting on the edge of my bed, his legs dangling over the side. He hadn't been there when I left. "Good boy," the voice said, though the doll didn't move. "Now put them under the pillow." I hesitated, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Do it," the voice snapped, sharp and commanding. With trembling hands, I slid the scissors under the pillow, then backed away as quickly as I could. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" the voice said, almost sweet now. "You'll sleep better knowing they're there. Trust me." I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I told myself I'd imagined everything. Maybe I was having nightmares. Maybe I was just a weird kid with an overactive imagination. But when I checked under the pillow, the scissors were gone, and Alf was sitting on the shelf, grinning at me like nothing had happened. That day I decided I needed to get rid of him. It took me a few days to work up the courage, but I knew I couldn't live like this anymore. Alf had to go. I waited until my mum left for work. Saturdays were perfect for this because she wouldn't be home until late, and I had the house to myself. With trembling hands, I grabbed the stuffed animal off the shelf. His plush fur felt rough against my palms, almost like bristles. The moment I touched him, I heard it again. "You don't want to do this?" I froze, clutching him tightly, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "Yes, I do," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. The laughter started, low at first, then louder, echoing in my ears like it was coming from inside my own head. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. "You think you can get rid of me? I'm your friend, kid. You'll miss me when I'm gone." "No, I won't," I muttered, more to myself than to him. My plan was simple. Take him out to the trash and be done with it. But as I walked through the house, clutching the doll tightly to my chest, the voice grew angrier. "You can't throw me away! I belong to you now. You'll regret this." By the time I reached the garbage can outside, tears were streaming down my face. I opened the lid and shoved Alf inside, slamming it shut before the voice could say anything else. I ran back inside, locking the door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. I told myself it was over, he was gone. But that night, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It started faint, like a branch tapping against the window. Then it grew louder, more insistent. I pulled the blankets over my head, trying to block it out, but the sound only got worse. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from inside the house. I peeked out from under the covers, my heart hammering in my chest. My room was dark, but in the faint moonlight I could see the outline of the door. The scratching was coming from the hallway just outside my room. Then I heard the voice. "You thought you could get rid of me?" It hissed, dripping with malice. "You can't. I'm never leaving." The doorknob began to turn. I screamed, diving under the covers and curling into a ball. The door creaked open and I felt the air in the room grow colder. "You don't throw away your friends," the voice said, closer now. "You'll pay for that." I don't remember what happened after that. Maybe I passed out from fear, or maybe I blocked it out. All I know is that when I woke up, the door was shut, and Alf was back on the shelf, sitting in his usual spot like nothing had happened. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. I couldn't get rid of him. I could throw him away, burn him, bury him. It wouldn't matter. He'd always come back, and every time he did, he'd be angrier. I started avoiding my room completely. I slept on the couch, claiming it was because the TV helped me fall asleep. My mum didn't question it. She figured it was just a phase. But every time I passed by my bedroom door, I could feel Alf's eyes on me, waiting. The whispers didn't stop, even outside the room. I'd hear him at night, his voice slithering through the shadows. "You can't ignore me forever," he'd say, or "We've still got games to play." But then one night, he made a new demand. "Bring me someone else." I froze, the words slicing through the silence like a knife. "What?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. "You heard me," the voice replied, low and menacing. "I'm bored with you. Bring me someone else and I'll leave you alone." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My stomach churned at the thought of what he might mean. "Your mom?" he added, his tone playful now. "She's always so busy. Don't you think she could use a little rest?" "No!" I shouted, louder than I meant to. The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd scared him off. But then the laughter started again, louder this time, echoing through the house. "You think you have a choice?" the voice roared, shaking with fury. "You're mine, kid. You don't get to say no." That was when I snapped. I didn't care if he came back. I didn't care if he haunted me forever. I was done being afraid. I stormed into my room and grabbed Alf off the shelf. His plush body felt heavier than it should have, like something inside him was alive and thrashing. "You want to scare me?" I screamed, shaking the doll. "Fine, but you don't get to hurt anyone else." The whispers turned into a deafening roar, but I didn't let go. I ran out of the house and into the backyard where my dad's old fire pit still sat, rusted and unused. I threw Alf into the pit and grabbed the can of lighter fluid from the garage. My hands were shaking as I doused the doll, the smell of chemicals filling the air. The voice screamed now, not in anger but in fear. "No, don't do this," it pleaded. "You'll regret it, I struck a match and dropped it into the pit. The flames roared to life, consuming the doll in an instant. The screams didn't stop, not until the fire burned down to embers, and all that was left of Alf was a pile of ash. I stood there for a long time, staring into the pit, half expecting him to crawl out, but he didn't. It was over. Or so I thought. Years later, when I was packing up my childhood home to move out, I found something in the attic. It was buried in an old cardboard box, tucked under some faded Christmas decorations. A stuffed Alf doll, singed and blackened, its plastic eyes melted into an expression that almost looked like it was laughing. I burned it again that night. And every time I've moved since, I've found him again. To this day, I don't know what Alf really is, or what he wants. All I know is that he's still out there somewhere waiting. And one day, he's going to find me. Thank you for joining me here at Nightmare Theatre. My name is Arthur Pembroke, and I'll see you again tomorrow night.